All right. Thank you so much, Josh. Welcome, everybody. We are here with Utah Ranked Choice Voting and some guests who I'm going to introduce in a moment. My name is Kelleen Potter. I'm the Executive Director of Utah Ranked Choice Voting. And I come to this from some time I was the Director of Elections for the state, and I've been an elected official in Heber City. I was the mayor for a time when we used ranked choice voting with much success, and the council has voted unanimously to use it again in this election. So we are excited to be here tonight. And the point of our being here, well, first I'm going to introduce all of our guests, and then we will talk to you about what we're going to do, and we'll proceed. So we have with us tonight the mayor of Millcreek, Mayor Silvestrini. We're grateful to have him here. I know he's got a lot going on in that big city and a campaign with no opponent. So he's so we're glad to have him tonight as Millcreek.
It would have been a ranked choice election, though.
It would have been. We were trying to get people to run against you, but no one wants to. They think you're doing great. So anyway, so that's exciting. And we also have two of the election administrators from Salt Lake City. We have Olivia Hoke, who is the elections management coordinator, and the city recorder herself, Cindy Trishman. Thanks to all three of you guests, and we will hear more from them in just a minute. So what we want to do tonight, and whenever you happen to listen to this, is to help as voters. We want you to feel informed and comfortable about the ballot that has either already come to you or will be landing soon in your mailbox. For those of you in the 10 cities using ranked choice voting. And if you're not and you're just here to learn, then welcome to you also. We're going to have an overview first to talk a little bit more about how this will work. And then we'll have some comments and information from our guests. We'll have a little Q&A. So right now, I'm going to turn over to Josh Daniels, who also works with me at Utah Ranked Choice Voting. He's the former Utah County Clerk and has tons of election experience as well as other political experience in our state. So he's going to take it from here.
Great. Thank you, Kelleen. Glad to be with you all. This is an exciting year for Utah where a lot of cities, especially the biggest city in Utah, Salt Lake City, is using ranked choice voting. Which will be very interesting because there are 3 or more candidates running for mayor in that city. And so the idea of ranked choice voting really will matter in the election. The way to best help voters understand ranked choice voting is really just to participate in using ranked choice voting. So I want to share on screen here a link or a QR code. If you have your smartphone out, you could scan this QR code. It'll take you right to an interactive demo or demonstration tool where you can actually vote on a ranked choice ballot and see how your vote impacts the results of the election. This particular demonstration poll is just for your favorite national park in Utah. We have 5 to choose from, so it makes it great to rank them. There's also a link, a short link on bit.ly, and it's bit.ly/Utah Park is the poll. So I'm going to give people a minute or two to participate in actually marking a ranked choice ballot on this demonstration poll, and then I'm going to show how those results actually work. For voters that might be watching this later, go ahead and pause the video and follow this link and try out a ranked choice ballot for yourself. Okay, now I'm going to switch over and show the results. So this is an ongoing poll that we've been running as a demonstration. So here you can actually see a visualization of the results for a ranked choice election. In this case, this is your favorite national park in Utah. So what happens in ranked choice voting is voters rank their choices. Rather than simply vote for one name on the ballot, they can express their preference as to their favorite and least favorite of the candidates on the ballot. No longer do they have to choose between 2 really liked candidates or choose between 2 really unliked candidates. They can express the full range of their preferences as a voter on their ballot by simply marking first, second, third, fourth, fifth, and so on. Ballots are designed with bubbles where there's a list of names on the left column. And then on the right, there's a table or a grid with bubbles where for the first column, those are your first choice. And so which candidate you choose as your first choice, you mark that in the first column. And in the second column, you mark your second choice, and so forth. Now, the way that this gets counted and the way that a winner is determined is always something voters are curious about. So sometimes we like to talk about this process as an instant runoff. Some people call it IRV, instant runoff voting, because it's as if we're having a runoff election, multiple rounds of an election, if you will, to select the winner. In the case of national parks, if we were a group of friends and we were going to go to one park for the weekend, we'd have to choose between these 5 parks. How would we do that? Would we all simply vote for our favorite park and then be done? And the park that would win might only get 2 votes? Or would we try to figure out a way to get a majority consensus about which park everybody was happy to go to? And that's what this instant runoff does. So in the first round of voting, Zion National Park did quite well, but did not win a majority. As you can see, a majority, in fact, of voters have a preference other than Zion, whether that's Bryce plus Arches plus Capitol Reef plus Canyonlands. Many people don't have Zion as their first choice. And so what we do is we look at first choice votes first. Those are the votes that matter most. If you're a voter, definitely mark your favorite candidate as your first choice. That's the most important vote that you cast. But if that candidate ends up not getting a majority of votes and is eliminated, then your vote can count for your second choice candidate. So in this scenario, round 1 shows Zion in the lead, Canyonlands in last place. So the way the instant runoff voting tabulation works is you would actually eliminate Canyonlands from the running. So we'll do that. So here Canyonlands has been eliminated, and you see that the voter that voted for Canyonlands as their first choice, their second choice was Zion. And so that vote gets counted for Zion, because that voter would like to go to Zion if they can't go to Canyonlands. And they can't go to Canyonlands because they came in last. And that's the way that works. And then we'll go to a third round. So Capitol Reef is eliminated, and the second choice votes from Capitol Reef went to Bryce. So now we have a 3-way race that's somewhat close between Zion and Bryce, and it's going to be very decisive as to those that want to go to Arches, which park is their second choice. So here in the 4th and final round, after we eliminate Arches from the running, we will see what those voters chose as their second preference. And they were actually split somewhat evenly, but with a slight edge for Zion, which gave Zion a 4-point lead over Bryce, and Zion wins with a majority of the vote. So this instant runoff voting process is important because it helps produce a majority winner. So I want to go back to the slides that I'm sharing, and we'll talk a little bit more about the specific dynamics of ranked choice voting, how it gets counted, and why it exists, and why people are using it for elections. First, I'll just give you a list here of the cities that opted to use ranked choice voting this year in Utah. So under Utah law, a city may use ranked choice voting if they choose for their city elections. That includes mayoral and city council spots. In this year's election cycle, 3 counties have cities that are participating: Salt Lake, Utah, and Wasatch counties. And these are the cities that are participating. Now, not every city or not every voter will actually have a ranked ballot, because in some of these cities, perhaps you're in a city council district where only 2 candidates are running. You don't have 3 candidates running, so you won't need to actually rank your choices. And I'll share that here. So, for example, in Kearns and Magna, not enough candidates actually filed to run for office that would necessitate using ranked choice voting. Those races are just between 2 candidates rather than potentially 3 or 4 or more. But in Salt Lake County, Midvale and Millcreek both have some city council districts that will be using ranked choice based on 3 or more candidates running. In Salt Lake City, very notably, the mayor's race has at least 3 candidates running, as well as some city council districts. And there's also a similar dynamic in some of the Utah County cities, which I haven't listed, but not every city in Utah does council member districts. So many cities in Utah County, for example, have at-large districts, which means the entire city and all the voters are voting on 3 spots for the city council. So in that scenario, there might be a dozen candidates or something running for one of these 3 spots, and you get to rank all the candidates together. You don't have to think of them in the silos that are the districts, which some cities have. Just wanted to briefly share a little bit about the landscape across the country for ranked choice voting. A lot of states are increasingly using ranked choice balloting for a variety of purposes. Some municipalities, like we do in Utah, some are using it in their party primaries or even in their party conventions, which we've seen in Utah as well. Both Republicans and Democrats have used ranked choice voting at their annual convention to nominate candidates. Some states actually have mandatory runoff elections. They have state law that requires a majority winner. And as a result, they have to run a runoff election. This is very notable in Georgia. The last few years, there have been news articles about these runoff elections that have occurred in Georgia. In the case of those runoff elections, if you are an overseas voter and maybe you're in the military, and you're permitted to send your ballot in by mail, there's not enough time for you to send in a second ballot after hearing who won or who moved on to the runoff election, because those runoff elections sometimes happen just 6 weeks after the previous election date. And so in those scenarios, voters actually submit a ranked choice ballot, and their ballot can then be counted in the runoff election based on their second or third preference that they've marked on that ballot. So that's one of the advantages of ranked choice voting, is that you're able to see who a second or third or fourth choice would be for that particular voter in the event that you have a runoff election. So in the United States, people sometimes talk about us having a winner-take-all system. And that is that we have a plurality system, which means that the first person to get past some post, oftentimes it's just the most votes in a multi-candidate race, wins all of the seats or wins all of the power. You win the entire election. We don't have a proportional system like some European countries have. So actually, internationally, those proportional systems are more common. And the United States system of winner take all and a plurality is very rare. And one of the challenges then is that you could have somebody who wins an incredible amount of political power based on far less than 50% plus one of the votes. And so those candidates who are elected in elections like that may not really represent the majority of voters. And ranked choice elections help us to determine who the majority winner is, which also eliminates something called the spoiler effect. This happens when maybe you've got 3 candidates running for the same office. The winning candidate might get, let's say, 45%. And the losing candidate gets somewhere in the 30s. But then there's this third candidate that potentially peeled votes away from one of those 2 candidates, and thus kind of spoiled a potential victory for either the losing candidate, or at least made it so that the winning candidate didn't win with a majority. Majority victory is important for a variety of reasons. And so ranked choice balloting can help ensure that the winner is actually chosen by a majority of the voters. So we've talked a little bit about the tallying and tabulation, so I won't belabor that point. But essentially, just to recap, first place votes matter most. After counting first place votes, the candidate that is in last place in first place votes is eliminated from the running. And then the votes that were cast for that last place candidate, the voters who cast those ballots and who have second preferences on those ballots, those second choice votes can then be counted for the second choice candidate. And that ballot can be counted towards a remaining candidate in the race who has not yet been eliminated. And that process continues until the field of candidates has been narrowed down to the final 2. And thus, mathematically, one of those 2 candidates will have won the election with a majority of those votes. What that does is actually reveal something that's very important about how a voter actually marks their ballot. It's highly encouraged that voters mark preferences for all of the candidates. There is there is absolutely no downside to ranking all of the candidates. Now, you're not required to rank all the candidates. Your ballot can still be counted with however many preferences that you mark, a first, a second, a third choice. But if you mark all of the candidates with your preference, first through however many candidates are running, then you can be sure that your vote will count in every one of the rounds of election. If by chance your first or second or third or fourth preference candidate doesn't end up winning, you still get to express your preference as to which of the remaining candidates will win. Sometimes a voter really wants, let's call it vanilla ice cream. But the reality is at this party, we're going to serve an ice cream other than vanilla, because vanilla is not going to win. And so if you don't express a preference between the remaining chocolate, strawberry, and banana, then one of those is going to be forced upon you. And you didn't really get a say as to which one, because you were vanilla or die. And so in this sort of fun example of vanilla, strawberry, chocolate, banana ice cream, it really is to the advantage of the voter to mark a preference for all four of those options, because one of them is going to win. And if it's not the one that was your first choice, at least you'll have your say in your preference in which of the remaining candidates ends up winning. And so that's a little bit about ranked choice voting. I now want to turn it back to Colleen for more of a discussion with our guests, and eventually we'll take some questions.
All right, thank you, Josh. We have a question in the Q&A, but we'll hold that for just a minute. You've kind of answered it, but if anybody else has them, you can put them in the Q&A and we'll get to them. So, okay, right now we have our guests and we'd love to hear hear from them. Let's start with Mayor Silvestrini. You guys used ranked choice voting in 2021, I believe. That's correct. And what was your experience with ranked choice voting? I see, you're using it again, so we assume it was positive, but how did it go?
So we used it 2 years ago. We had 2 council races up for decision, and we had 4 candidates in each of those races. And so, our voters went through it, and then, as a council, we were concerned, what do people think about ranked choice voting? And we adopted it for the same kinds of reasons that we've already talked about. I think it made for a more civil campaign because candidates were out there saying, "Hey, if you don't choose me first, at least choose me second." And so I think it did improve the tone of the campaign. And when we surveyed people, we were careful. We surveyed people right after the election and said, what did you think about it, Millcreek residents? And about 70% of the folks said we liked it. And we asked them a bunch of questions. We asked them, did you like it? Did you not like it? Did you understand it? Did you not understand it? And people came back and told us that they understood the process, it made sense to them, and they liked it. And then, we had to consider whether to choose it again this cycle. And this cycle, we had a mayoral, election potential and 2 council races. And once again, same kind of proportion, in the range of 70% of our residents on a survey said, we like ranked choice voting, we want you to do it again. And our council decided in both times to do this, not only because our voters wanted to do it, but because, particularly in the case of races where you don't get contested races, you save money by doing it this way. You don't have to run a primary and a general election. Everything is wrapped up in the general election. So in our city, that saved us, about $80,000 to $90,000. That number is variable depending on who participates. Our county clerk charges based upon how many cities opt in to ranked choice voting. So it saved money for the voters. It made a more civil campaign, and our voters liked it.
Well, that's great. It's interesting. We hear sometimes people who oppose it think that voters can't understand it, or it's not enough time to figure it out. And even in a big city like Millcreek, the time frame consolidated was enough for voters to figure out who they liked, rank them, and vote. And that's one of the advantages, I think. voters get fatigue. They're tired of signs. They're tired of campaigns. They just want to figure it out and make their decisions. So I think it's one advantage too. So thank you. That's helpful to hear.
Yeah, the other thing, Kelly, that I can say is that, it did shorten the campaign time, because if we had not done it, that, we would have had a primary in June, and so this way candidates didn't even have to file until August. So it shortened the time for campaign signs. It did shorten that campaign time, but we didn't find that was a problem. Our residents obviously agreed.
Thank you. And primaries, especially municipal primaries, are notorious for having the lowest turnout of any type of election. So you have the smallest number of voters making those determinations. And now, at least for whoever votes in the general, everyone gets a chance to vote. So thank you. That's really helpful. All right, why don't we hear from Cindy and Olivia? What was the experience in Salt Lake, and how are things going for you guys?
Yeah, so Salt Lake City opted to use ranked choice voting in the 2021 election and had a good experience. We felt like it was successful, and the city council opted to use it in this year's election. Just as the reasons Mayor Silvestrini has noted, I think that would be the echo.
Yeah, it was just, we've heard a lot from voters because the city council did during the last election, grant some money to do an awareness, pardon me, an awareness campaign. So because of that campaign that happened last election, this year, when talking to voters, they're like, oh, well, we heard about this last time. We know how to do this. This is super easy. We got this. And we also heard from voters that more short campaign time, they enjoyed that. They liked that. And then more of a civil rhetoric amongst candidates.
And you guys have done an excellent job with education. And I think it's spilled over to the other cities in Salt Lake County, even up here in Heber. Like I've heard radio ads that you guys have done, or, you guys have done a really super job. I think it's helped everyone in the state get educated. So that's really great.
And if voters haven't already, you guys put together an excellent tutorial video, just a short little video that's on your website that kind of illustrates how ranked choice voting works. I thought that was very helpful and informative. Good work on that. If voters want to see that, they should go to your website. I think that's a great video. In fact, we've shared that video in a lot of other educational forums. It's a great tool.
Thank you.
One of the things maybe you guys could answer for us is, a lot of people will say, oh, it takes longer with ranked choice voting, and a lot of people don't understand the difference between election night results and canvass results. And they think that ranked choice voting has delayed the results. So could you explain how that works? Like, when will people know the results, and when will they be official? How does that work?
You guys want to take that one?
Yeah, if I can speak to that a little bit. One thing that I've noticed is that candidates are watching the polls every day, because you still have to wait for mail-in ballots to come in and all of those other things. So it's actually just like the traditional voting method, where the results are not final until the canvass. It just may make polling a little more difficult, but then I've also spoken with voters actually like this better, because like, well, I just know not to look until the day of the canvass, as I should, and then that's when they're final. Cindy, do you want to speak to anything else?
I would just add that I think it's furthered awareness of how a campaign and ballots are processed. Nothing happens in a snap of a finger. And so I think it really adds value to the process of the elections.
And the other thing that I would add is that ranked choice voting doesn't delay anything. Our election results are maybe a little bit different in the modern era where we use mail-in ballots than they were when you had an election night where there was a total crush of trying to count ballots. And the reason for that is that the way ballots are allowed to be mailed in, there's a trailing time for them to reach the county clerk because of just the mail time it takes to mail something, and so really I think that the certainty of an election is really not even that much longer than it was before. There were always trailing polling places that would have trouble getting their ballot information into the county clerk, and that's really what causes, and if there's a delay, that's what causes it. And then a lot of folks don't understand that actually, in every election, even without ranked choice voting, the results are not official until the board of canvassers for each elected body meets and certifies the results of the election. And that normally happens, what is it, 20 days after the,
So I think
14
yeah.
days.
It can vary
14
from
okay.
cycle, but it's 2 to 3 weeks typically.
Yeah. So, and then this election cycle is even more weird just because Congressman Stewart resigned, and in order to accommodate the election of his successor, the state, pushed the election back by about 3 weeks so that that election could be handled, that special election could be handled on the same ballot, which saved voters in the state a lot of money for not having to run a special election. But it did push back all the other elections, longer than what we would otherwise have. So anyway, it's not a ranked choice voting problem that it takes longer to certify an election.
Well, I mean, and a great example of that, sorry, is in Florida in the year 2000, when you had Bush v. Gore, and that election wasn't decided until there was a recount and there was even court action. And that wasn't a ranked choice election. That was just the fact that it was a close election. And so the final certified results were in dispute because they were so close. And I've seen all over the country examples, they don't happen a lot, but they do happen, where you have a city council race, even very small towns, decided by just one vote. And so it may very well matter a lot, that last ballot that gets to you, that last absentee ballot that comes by mail the day before your canvass, that might flip the tides in the election. Go ahead. What were you going to say?
I was just going to add a frequent question that we receive as a candidate, they want to have a celebratory time generally on election night. And we've encouraged the celebration of the result. Like, you made it to election day. Great work. All of your team contributed and the ballots are in the process, right? It gives a reason for another party if that's decided upon after the canvass, or it just reiterates the value of the team's work without celebrating. It sounds negative, but it is definitely a component that the candidates think about with each conversation we have.
And a lot of times we do know, practically speaking, we do know on election night by 10 o'clock, which is a little bit late for a party for some people, but those, but yeah, you don't always know in a close race, but in some races you can tell.
Yeah, and you can tell them, you're 6,000 votes apart, and there's 1,000 ballots still to be counted, and people can kind of get a sense of, is there a chance? Am I for sure? But that's just the nature of a lot of the things that have changed is to make it more accessible for more voters, like mail-in voting, like all these things, and provisional ballots where someone moved and they come to vote, and you say, well, gosh, you're not registered here, but you get to vote, and then we're going to make sure that you're registered and that it counts and that your signature's right, and then it'll be processed. So some of these things have made it better for all of us as voters. And it might just take, it just takes a little bit longer, and that's okay, because it wouldn't be any different if we didn't have ranked choice voting. It's the same time frame and the same rules. I want to jump to a question that came on the chat. What if there is some place or someone you really don't want, without simply not ranking them? How would you indicate that they're your least favorite choice? A lot of people are asking this because they think there's a way to game the system, and I'll take a stab at this and then anyone else can as well. So what I tell people is, if you have a few favorites and there's several candidates and you rank them and you rank none of the others, you are only disenfranchising yourself. You're not helping them. You're not hurting them, because your vote would have never been counted unless everyone you like is out of the running. So if there's someone you really, really hate, all you can do is just put them last, and it's not going to help them in any way. You rank them last, and that means that every other candidate's gone, and they would win anyway, unless, I can't even think of a way that there would be a gaming of this. It's either you like them and you express your preference, or you don't care at all, and you say, I don't care who wins out of those three people. I don't care one bit. Then don't rank them if you feel better about that. But I can't think of any way to game it.
And Colleen, I've heard people say that ranked choice voting disenfranchises some people, that their vote doesn't count, but that's really not true. It's just that they're voting for the candidate that is going to lose anyway. If we were in a regular election, their candidate would still lose. So they're not disenfranchised in any way. even if they don't rank the one candidate, that candidate was never going to win. So
Exactly. Yeah, excellent.
Yeah, and another way to think about that, Kelly, this idea of your least favorite, to go back to an earlier example about ice cream or something, just kind of keep it kind of fun. Imagine we're gonna eat something, and it's gonna be either ice cream or cookies or pickled cabbage or I don't know, pig's feet or something, right? And for whatever reason, this is a group of people that really like pig's feet and pickled cabbage. And so you're outnumbered. You're not getting ice cream. You're not getting cookies. So now you've got to choose. You're either eating pickled cabbage or pig's feet. You've got to make that choice. You can simply demur and say, well, I have no choice. Okay, well, somebody else is going to choose that for you, right? And so at the end of the day, it actually, I think, makes a lot of sense for voters to actually consider every candidate, to really consider that each and every one of those candidates could win. And you have a chance to determine who that winner is by ranking all of the candidates based on your preference. And a lot of people just say, well, I just like Joe and I don't care about the other five. It's like, great. Well, if Joe's not going to win, your vote's not going to count for all the other people. And this is the problem with traditional plurality voting, is you just pick one name. You don't spend any time learning about the other candidates. You end up just being upset that your candidate didn't win. And at the end of the day, oftentimes the winner wins with less than 50%. And so it's not really a coalition majority of the voters that actually put that candidate in office. It's this interesting confluence of competing opinions that where you have this divided vote. I think of the example of the Utah Republican primary election in 2020, where you had a four-way race between Spencer Cox, former Speaker of the House Greg Hughes, former Governor John Huntsman Jr., former Republican Party Chair Thomas Wright, along with his running mate, former Congressman Rob Bishop. I mean, you had very well-known political actors in the Republican Party competing for the governorship. And it was obviously close. And Spencer Cox won, but he didn't get a majority. And so people are left wondering, well, does he have a mandate or not? And what would have happened if there would have been this ranking process? And I think that if we give voters the opportunity to rank their choices, we can all feel better about the outcome. We can all better understand where our friends and neighbors are at when it comes to their preferences. The one who wins can actually have a mandate and not be criticized for not getting a majority. I just think it serves everybody in the process better to get that majority victory.
One question that I hear occasionally is, ranked choice voting is bad because it's possible for someone who gets the most votes in the first count to lose the election. And I want us to talk about that for a minute, because it is possible. It is possible that someone gets 30% of the votes and the rest of them are split between several other candidates. And if you think about this, you think about a jurisdiction, and let's say that 70% of the people are sort of like-minded politically, and they have 4 candidates who are running, and they are pretty similar, and they split up all those 70% of the votes. And then one person represents an extreme of either side, and they got 30%. Well, in a traditional plurality election, the person that represents 30% of the district, of the city, whatever, could win. But in ranked choice voting, you would say, oh, okay, well, now we'll drop the lowest one. And then ultimately, it's likely that those 70% of the people would coalesce around one of those candidates, and that candidate would win. So even though some people think that's a flaw in the system, it's actually a benefit, because it does show that the person who ends up being elected represents the majority of the voters. And so that's how that can happen sometimes.
And it also prevents the kind of situation that has happened in politics, where a spoiler comes in, exactly like what you're saying, and siphons enough votes away from the most popular candidate, perhaps, to allow somebody who the majority doesn't support to win. So this eliminates that spoiler effect, really.
Yeah, that's an old trick of political strategists, to say, I'm going to try and get someone to run that will pull votes away from their opponent and help their candidate to win. And you cannot do that in a ranked choice voting election, because if the people voted for that third party or whatever candidate, then that one would be eliminated, and then it would just go back to where it would have gone originally. So that's another important thing to understand about ranked choice voting.
You know, Kelly, this issue comes up so frequently. I think it's important to share an example from the last election cycle in Millcreek. I'm going to share my screen one more time and show viewers here.
District 2.
District 2, exactly. So this is a very interesting but not uncommon scenario. You have a four-way race for city council. You have a fairly close race between at least two candidates here, Tom and Jeremiah, although Angel's a fairly close third, relatively speaking. But what happens here is in the first round of voting, what you would think of as the old plurality system, Jeremiah wins with 34.7% of the vote. But now think about that for a second, 34% of the vote. That means over 65%, nearly 2/3 of the voters did not pick Jeremiah first. If we were looking at our traditional system, Jeremiah would win the election, no question. But we now have the opportunity with a ranked choice ballot for voters to express their second, third, and fourth preferences. And we can actually see how a runoff would play out. And this is how the official race worked. So Linda was last place. And when she's eliminated with round 2 and her votes are redistributed, now it's nearly a tie. Jeremiah is still in the lead, but only by 1 vote. And now it's very close between Tom and Jeremiah. So now it's going to be very decisive to see where Angel's votes go after Angel's eliminated. And when Angel's eliminated, way more than 50% of those votes go to Tom, and Tom wins with actually a fairly healthy margin, 54.5%, almost 55% of the votes. In many other elections, they would say that's a very healthy margin. That's not a close race. So what that shows is that a majority of voters preferred Tom to Jeremiah, but because there were 4 candidates in the race, there was a sort of a potential spoiler effect. But with ranked choice voting, you now know where the majority of those voters' preferences actually lied. Tom went on, obviously won that race and is on the council today. So it's a very close to home example. This doesn't happen that often. Oftentimes the candidate who's first place on the first round tends to win. But when this happens, this is exactly why ranked choice voting exists, to make sure that the winner truly gets a majority of all the voters that participated. Yeah, any thoughts or reaction, Jeff? That's your city. I imagine that was a bit of a I don't know. I bet people had strong feelings about that.
Well, there were some that had strong feelings, that mainly supporters of Jeremiah, and interestingly, I think in terms of political alignment, Angel and Tom were much more closely aligned in terms of their political viewpoints than Jeremiah. It's almost like we have nonpartisan races here, but you might even think of this as almost a party line kind of thing. And I think the majority of Millcreek residents would have supported either Tom or Angel over Jeremiah. I mean, that's just the way that broke. So I agree that that in this particular case, the majority got their way. So.
And I think when that
and let me say this, I like Jeremiah. He's a great guy. He's he's volunteering and other things in Millcreek, and that's just the way elections work sometimes. So it's nothing against any particular candidate. It's I'm thrilled actually that when I see 4 candidates that want to vie for an office, that's a healthy thing about our democracy, and it's a healthy thing that shows people care about our city.
Well, and you made an important point, Mayor. You said that you felt like, the perception of voters in Millcreek would be that Tom and Angel were politically aligned. And so what would happen traditionally is whatever that political alignment was, and it doesn't have to be partisan. Sometimes cities are fighting over something. It's to have the new park or to not have the new park. You have the Parkers and the no Parkers. And these are the 2 tribes that fight over a city council race. And so what ends up happening is if 2 people from the no Parkers want to run for office and 1 person from the Parkers wants to run for office, there's a conversation between the no Parkers, and they say, hey, two of us can't be in the race. One of us has to drop out. Well, one of the problems is you don't know what the voters are going to think. Maybe one of these candidates is more appealing for some reason than another. And so it actually would be better for the no Parker faction in this scenario to put forward two candidates because they don't know which one's going to catch fire. But traditionally with plurality elections, there ends up this gentleman's agreement. Well, you've got to drop out. We think that, Joe can win and Susie can't. So it's Joe and not Susie. So Susie needs to, drop out of the race. And that's not fair to the Susie in that scenario. And so with ranked choice voting, we don't have to worry about that. They can all run and, they're not going to split the vote.
It's not fair. And it's also something that can create some legal jeopardy because there are actually criminal penalties for, in some circumstances, for discouraging somebody to drop out of a race or to do that, especially if one of the people is an incumbent in the office. So this eliminates that problem.
If I can add just an additional component that we've discussed with candidates and with voters is the opportunity to present your position on a variety of issues that are impacting the city, and thereby suggesting like all the voters get educated on their position in the variety of issues that are being faced, not a single issue, which is a component of the more civil dialogue and opportunity because it provides voters more information.
Yeah, that's a really important point. I think that does kind of add a little more depth to the elections when candidates have to talk about more issues and voters start to get a sense of that instead of just liking one person and ignoring the rest. So if anyone else who's watching now live wants to put a question in the Q&A, we will answer those. While we're waiting for that, I want to bring up another point that sometimes we don't talk about that much, and it is like Lehigh used ranked choice voting in their primary. And after they certified the results, they had 6 candidates who were going to the general election. And I'm sure our city election officials can tell us more if that's happened in Salt Lake. But anyway, one of those candidates said, wait a minute, I'm dropping out because I'm going to run for this other opening for the Senate. And because they had done ranked choice voting, they were able to, between the election day and the canvass, they could rerun those and find the next person in line. So they had their full slate of 6 candidates. And so they knew what the voters wanted. Normally you would have just had 5. That's what's happening in Midway right now. Someone dropped out and they just have 5 now. Another opportunity is in Heber, we've had a few people drop out after the ballots are printed. People vote for them. It affects the outcome of the election, but they've dropped out and the voters didn't know. Well, with ranked choice voting, that's not a problem because you know who they would have chosen next after that candidate. But in a traditional election, that vote is just wasted. It's gone. In the 2020, I just heard this statistic in the presidential primary, 80% of the people who voted on the Democratic ballot in Utah, their votes didn't count because that many candidates had dropped out by the time of the election. And so ranked choice voting helps with some of those little technicalities that we don't really think that much about, but happen all the time.
Yeah,
So,
Salt Lake City, I bet you've never had candidates drop out, right? It seems that in these municipal elections, you always have candidates drop out. Sometimes they get disqualified because they forget to submit their financial disclosure by the deadline or some other unfortunate sort of bureaucratic hurdle, if you will. But this happens so often that you have a printed ballot going to voters with a candidate who is essentially not in the race. And ranked choice voting eliminates the problems associated with that.
We do have that instance actually this time around.
oh, this time.
So in talking with the county, we had the question, will this candidate's name be blocked out? And in speaking with the county, they're like, well, there's no need to because they'll just go to their second preference. And it saved a lot of headache, which saved me a lot of stress, which is something that I really appreciate about this process.
Yep. Go ahead.
It doesn't decrease our communication to further educate the voters of the person who has who is no longer running, correct? But it does give a space for the ballots to still be maintained with integrity.
Yeah, I remember when I was county clerk, this happened a number of times. And just like you, we were very nervous about communicating to the voters, making sure the voters know, this name's on the ballot, but they're not going to be able to win. Any vote that's going to be cast for that ballot is going to be wasted. And no matter how much communication you do, there will still be voters that are going to vote for that candidate, and they're not going to get the communication. And those votes are wasted. Those voters are, in a sense, disenfranchised. But with ranked choice voting, they don't have to be. If they've done their homework and they've actually expressed a preference for all the candidates that are on the ballot.
All right. I do not see any questions in the chat, but are there any other things that we want to cover for this? No, there's not.
I've got a question for both you, Jeff, and for the city recorder's office there in Salt Lake City. What are the biggest questions that you've heard from voters that you think need to be answered, that show maybe misunderstanding on the part of voters? What would be the number one or number two questions that you get that you think ought to be answered?
I think we've already hit on it, but it is is my vote wasted? Because I only chose 2 candidates instead of 3 or 4. There's that. That's the main thing I think that I've heard in terms of a question about the mechanics of it, about trying to game the system. In fact, I even remember candidates in our election suggesting that people should only vote for 3 out of the 4 or something like that. But I think if folks understand that you're not giving anything up by ranking your last candidate last, you're not elevating them by doing that, that this works. So
Yeah, I think that's an important point that some people do. They talk about it to make people think if they don't vote for all the candidates, then none of their votes count. But essentially, it just means that you got to vote for who you voted for. If they lost, they lost. You just gave up some opportunity to have a say on the remaining candidates. But that's an important point to. When people use the term exhausted ballots, no one's ballot is disqualified. It just means that you didn't vote for all of the choices you could have, but that's also a choice that voters can make. But yeah, I always encourage people, vote for everyone, because again, you don't know what you're going to end up with, and you might as well have a say.
I believe our most frequently asked question is, will this take longer because you are using RCV? And we've already touched on the answer of that. And I feel like it's clear that it's not different than the traditional method when you look at it in a technicality.
Yeah.
I would agree with Cindy Lou. I think the other question that we've gotten a lot was, well, why are we doing this for president? I said, well, we're not in Utah. We're just using it for municipal races. So you don't need to worry. So.
People have said that to us a lot too. Why aren't other elections run this way? And it's a fair question.
Yeah, and we tell people, talk to your legislators, because that's who gets to decide. And it does make a lot of sense, particularly for these presidential races when there's so many candidates and so many of them are coming and going, not coming, but they're dropping out. And it would be nice to be able to. I know Utah's moved that up earlier and earlier, and we want to vote as early as possible, but you also want to have a say around the candidates who are still in the race. So, all right. Well, if we don't have any other things, I can't think of any other things we haven't covered that are relevant for our voters. Again, we're available. Your cities are always available, your counties. Anybody has questions beyond this, there's always help to make sure you're voting your ballot correctly.
And get out there and vote. Please vote. These municipal elections affect you more than any other elections, period. The local government is the closest to the people, and it provides you with services. It touches your life a lot more than Congress or the State House.
Yeah, it's so important. All right. Well, I guess with that, I will say thank you so much to everyone who's participated. Thanks to our guests. Thanks to those of you who watched this on a recording. And thanks to Josh for getting this all set up for us. And all the best.
Thanks, Josh. Thanks, Colleen.
Good to see y'all.
Thank you, guys.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
All right. Take care.
Hey, take care. Bye-bye.